Hey, welcome to a new day on continuing to build our job application form web app. So yesterday we worked on the front end. We built this HTML page using HTML and Bootstrap, and the user can fill in those entries here, and then they are supposed to press on submit, but currently nothing happens. So what we'll do today is we're going to implement the submission of this form. Where is this form going to be submitted? To an SQL database. So these data are going to be stored in an SQL database. Plus, we're going to send these data to the email that the user provides here. So let's do this today. I'll see you in the next video. Hey, welcome back. In this video, we will implement the submit button. So currently, if the user fills in the entries here, the form, and they press submit, nothing happens. So how can we implement this button? Well, to do that, you first need to understand what actually is the user trying to do here technically when they press submit. So for that, we need to talk about HTTP requests again. So when the user loads a URL, they are doing a GET request because they are getting some data. They are getting those data on their browser, so that is a GET request. They are not sending their data to the server. So our server has the files, the Python files, the HTML files, right? And so the user is requesting the index.html file from us. That is a GET request. But when the user presses a submit button, that is a POST request because they are trying to post some data to our server. So these data will be sent to the app.py file. We're going to get those data as strings here or other Python data types, and then store those values in a database and also send them by email. The place we should start is the index.html template, and we should locate the form tag, which is somewhere in here. So you see the body tags, you have div tags, h1, and then you have the form. Now this form currently does not support a post HTTP request. So to be able for the form to support a post request, you should add a method attribute, and that should be equal to the post string, so with quotes, right? That's all we need to do in the HTML template for now. Now we need to work on the Python code. So in here, specifically inside the index function, because we're still working on the home page, right? This is the URL of your website, and that URL contains this form. So we should work on this index function. Now, currently the index function also only handles GET requests. If you want this index function to also handle POST requests, because in this page there are two types of requests happening, right? So a GET request when the page is loaded and a POST request when the submit button is pressed. Therefore, in the root method here of the decorator, you should add another argument called methods, and that will be equal to a list, and this list will contain two strings. One get string and one post string. So with that, we specify that this URL now will be able to handle both get requests and also post requests. And then in the function, we write a conditional. We say if request dot method is equal to post, so a conditional, we do something. But first, let's import request. You can hover your mouse here and go to import this name, and you want to go to flask.request. So that should add this in your import statements. So comma requests. So this comes from Flask. Don't confuse this with the requests library. So this is an object that is able to handle requests in your Flask app. So you say if request.method is post, so a method is now a property which will contain either a get string or a post string depending on whether the user is simply loading this page as so, right? When they load the page using the URL, in that case, method will be equal to get. But when they press that submit button, which was somewhere here, then method will be equal to post, the string post. So that's how we control, we know what's happening on the web page. Because you know, this web app that we're building will be able to handle multiple visitors, right? So if someone in India is visiting the web page, they may be doing a get request at a given time, and someone in the USA might be pressing the submit button also at the same time. So the app is able to handle those two users separately. And then in here, if the request is post, then we get the first name in a variable first name using request.form, and we get the first name here. What is this? This is the name of the input widget. So for example, we have this first widget which is created by this input element. So that creates the first text box where the user inputs their name, and this input element has first name as the value of its name attribute, right? So this is the first name that we're using here. So that will allow us to actually get the value of first name from the form. So let's try that out. Let's print it out for now, just to see if we are good so far. So with that, I'll run the app, reload, fill in the data, and submit. Now again, nothing will happen, right? We'll not see anything here because we are not handling what will be displayed after the submit button, but we should be able to get the first name, Ardit in this case, printed out. It should be displayed somewhere here. If not, that means this was not executed, so this line was not executed, as is the case in my computer. So this was not executed because probably this was not evaluated to true, because probably the method was not equal to post. But to prove that, we first want to print out, before the f conditional block, we want to print out the request.method property, right? And then reload the page. So reload it first as that. You see here, now we get a get request, right? Because it was actually a get request. But now let me fill in the data again and press submit. And let's see what we've got this time. So we got no new output here because no request is happening. No get request, no post request. That means there's an issue with the button. So if you go to index.html and you locate your button element. Now this button should be type submit. However, mistakenly we have put this as a button. So you should replace the type of the button to a submit button, right? Then go to the web page, reload, fill in the data again, press submit, go to Flask, and yeah, this time we got a post request. So post was printed out by this line here, and then Ardit was printed out by this line in here, the first name. So now it is working. So let me remove that first print function, this one as well, and so I'll duplicate this. So this will be last name last name. Then we have the email address, email. So make sure that these correspond to, let me split this to the right. They should correspond to the names of the input elements. So last name, email, then we have the date, date, and then lastly we have the occupation. And the name for that is also occupation. So all the radio buttons share the same name, occupation. That allows them to be grouped together, and that name should also be used here. So that's how you get the values that the user inputs in the web page. And so before we finish this lecture, let's make sure that we correctly got the values of these 4 variables. To do that, again, you can either print out all of these using a print function where you place first name, comma, last name, comma, email, etc. Or you can use debugging. Let's use debugging. So for that, you need to place a breakpoint after these values. So if you want to know the values of these variables, you want to place a breakpoint in the next non-empty line, which is this one in here. So put your cursor there, and then you don't want to run the app or rerun it, you want to press the debug button or right click and go to debug app. Then you want to go to the web page, reload that, and PyCharm will take you back here, but you want to go back to the page, fill in those data, press submit, and then PyCharm will take you back here again, but this time you'll see these values here, so the variables, right? So in here we can see the date, so the date variable is a string, so that's the date that the user entered. The email address, a string, you see str, the first name, last name, and occupation. Now with occupation we have a problem. This is simply saying that one of the radio buttons was pressed, but we don't get the actual value of the selected radio button. So let's fix that. To fix this issue, we need to add a value attribute to each of the radio buttons, because otherwise we will get this on string. So by default the value of the selected button is on, but if you add here, so let's go to the first radio button, which is the employed option, and add a value of employed. We need to add a value for the other radio buttons as well, so this is unemployed. Make a space there between the value and the required property. Same for this, value is equal to self-employed, and lastly value is equal to student. Good. Now let's stop this debugging process and start it again. So make sure that the dot is here, start the debugging again, reload the page. Now if you get this empty section here which is saying variables are not available, you should put your cursor in the line where your breakpoint is and press this button here, run to cursor. Press it once and press it twice, 3 times until you see this connected here. And then go to the web page and you should see the website again. So again you can fill it in with data. Click one of the options, press submit, and now we should see the occupation as unemployed. So that reflects our choice here in the radio group. So that's how you can get the data from your Python form, from your Flask form, and access them from your Python scripts here. In the next videos, we'll get this data, store them in a database, and then also send them by email to the user's email address. So see you later. Hey, welcome back. In the previous video, we accessed the data entered by the user using this code here. So now we have those data stored in variables, and the next step is to get the values from these variables and store them in an SQL database. So we're going to use SQLite, but through the SQL Alchemy library. So you need to import from Flask SQL Alchemy, which is the library which you need to install. So Flask _ SQL Alchemy. You need to open your terminal and do pip install Flask, but use a dash, so you import it with an underscore in between these two words. But then to install it, you should use a dash. So Flask SQL Alchemy. So this is a separate library, but it does interact with Flask. So from Flask SQL Alchemy, you want to import the SQL Alchemy class. So why are we using SQL Alchemy and not using the SQLite 3 library, which we used previously in the course in the GUI apps, in the desktop GUI apps? Well, because this library allows us to interact with the database using more high-level code, which makes it easier for us to manage the database and the data. You'll see how exactly. So once we import this, then below the app instance, you want to create a database instance with db is equal to SQL Alchemy, and you provide the app variable which holds the Flask instance as the argument of this class. So that will create an SQL Alchemy database instance. Now, in between these two, we should specify a series of parameters using app.config, which is a dictionary, and out of this dictionary, we should access the keys of this dictionary. So app.config is a dictionary, secret key is one of the keys of that dictionary, and we want to set here a secret key for our app. This will guard the application from hackers for things like cookies, tampering, and hijacking the session. So those hackers will need this key here if they want to perform those actions. So just set a key, whatever you like my application 123, just something simple for now. So that's the first parameter. The second parameter is app.config. Again, you use the same syntax, so a dictionary, and this would be SQL Alchemy _ database _ URI. I'm going to provide these also as lecture resources, so you can just copy them and paste them, because this is quite fragile. It's easy to do a typo here and things will not work, and it will be difficult to troubleshoot it. So this will be equal to SQLite : / 3 slashes and then data.db. So what is this? Well, this specifies that the URI of the database is this one here. So the URI specifies that we're using an SQLite database. If we were using MySQL, this would be something like MySQL and so on. But in this case, it's SQLite, and this is the name we want to have for the database file, which will be created by Flask. So that's the value of this key of that dictionary. So these two specify the parameters of the database. Now the next step is to create the database itself. To create the database, we need a database module. And we create a database module using a class let's name this class form, and this should inherit from db.model, this here. So db is an instance of an SQL Alchemy class. So this class has this model property, which is also a class, right? And so this form will inherit from this model class. And here we simply specify the fields of the database table. So let's start with an ID. This is going to be db.column, db.integer. So the db instance does have a lot of attributes such as column, integer. Let's set this as a primary key. So primary key, set it to true. So this will be the first field of the database table, the first column. This is usually the standard practice. You create an ID and you set it as the primary key. So this will be like a unique ID that identifies each row of the table. So in the table, we're gonna have an ID for each user submission, right? So user rdid will have one row in the database table. And so here we'll have the first name of that user, which is again db column, and the ID should be db.string with capital S, so don't confuse this with the string data type of Python. This is from db, not from the Python standard library string type. So let's set an 80 characters maximum for the first name. I'm going to duplicate this for the last name as well. I'm going to duplicate it for email. Let's put it as a string for the email as well. SQLite doesn't have a specific type for emails. And then we've got available date or date. So this is a date that the job candidate wants to start the new job. Now this is going to be db.date, and remove that, also the parentheses. So db.date, not with parentheses. Another duplication, and this will be occupation. This will also be a string. So we'll store here unemployed or employed or self-employed or student. That string, let's set it at 80 characters maximum. So that's our database model. Now we need to execute this class somehow, so that we create the table in this file, which is also going to be created because it doesn't exist yet here in our project directory. To create the database from this model, we should go here to the very end, and first let's add this routine here, if name is equal to main. I've explained this several times what this means, so you need to indent that there. You also need to add something else with app.appContext with parentheses, and you indent that one more time, and before that you say db.createAll. So what this will do is it will create a database, because db points to this variable, right? So let's try this. Let's run the app. So this is app.py. I'm going to run it. Reload the page. Go here. And if you expand the project directory now, you'll see that an instance directory has been automatically created. And inside that instance, you should see the data.db file, which corresponds to this file name here, data.db. So when we ran the Flask app, this database was created. If you run the Flask app for a second time, the database will not be recreated, because this method basically checks if there exists a database with that name, with that URI. And if it exists, it will not overwrite it, but it will use the existing database. Now, what is inside this database, you might ask? Well, to check that, you need a third-party program, DB browser for SQLite. You can search for that program online and install it. It's easy to install that program. And so then you open it and you should see something like this. And then you could go to Open Database and locate that particular Flask app. So this is my project, app 16 Flask form. If I go to instance, I locate the data.db file, I open it, and then you want to go to browse and you want to select the form table here. So you see it has created a table named form with an ID, first name, last name, email, date, and occupation fields. So that's where we are so far. Using the SQL Alchemy class, we were able to get this class, this database module, and create a database out of that. So this class is connected to SQL Alchemy using this db.module. And so then you say db.createAll, and that class will be called and those columns will be added to the database. So this is quite a high level usage of interacting with databases. So with this lecture is complete, and next we're ready to store the user data to the database that we created in this video. So let's do that in the next one. Hey, in the previous video we created an empty database file and also a table inside that file. That was created by this class and also that method call there. Now we want to be able to send this data to that database table. So let's do that. It's very easy to do, and here is where you actually understand the benefit of having high-level libraries such as SQL Alchemy. So you just need to create a form instance. So form is the class that we created up here, right? Which contains the database module. And form now gets as arguments the column name. So first name is equal to first name. So this is the argument name. This is the value. So as a value, I'm giving this variable. This variable holds the actual name of the user. So if the user entered rdit in the field, in the first name field, then rdit will be stored in here as the value of this argument. So let's do the same for last name is equal to last name, comma, enter to split the line into multiple lines. It's more readable. Email is equal to email, date is equal to date, occupation is equal to occupation. Once you do that, you access the db variable, which we created up here. db is equal to SQL Alchemy, and then you do session.add form. So you add the form to the session. So the form now contains the values, the user values, and then you want to commit to that session. So that will store the actual data to the database. So we're performing basically like an insert SQL query here, but through a high-level way. With that, we can go to the web page, reload it, fill in some data, 1/1/2023, self-employed, submit, and you might get this error. For sure you will get it, and let's read the error together. So it says that SQLite data type only accepts Python data objects as input. So you see now we start to see the actual commands which are executed behind the scenes. So you see we have an insert into first name, last name, email, date, occupation values, these values. And then we have the parameters. So email, this email, last name, occupation, first name, date. So the problem here is that we need to provide a Python date object, right? Not a string. Because in here, when we get the date inside our index function, right, this date will be a variable containing a string which will look something like this: 2024 January 1st. So this is what is stored in this date variable, and that string is then sent to the database here. But the database does not accept that, since the database accepts a date type, right? You see here in the form class we specified a date type. So let's fix this. To fix that, you should work on the index function. First, let me remove this here. And so we need to get, let's say, a date object variable. I'm storing the new datetime object in this variable. So you can create datetime objects in Python using the datetime library. So this is a standard library, and you want to import the datetime class out of that library. And then you go down here inside the index function and you say datetime.strptime date, so this variable which contains a string. So the date is as a string, and you should declare what format this string has, right? So the format is %Y minus %M. I know this format when we print it out. Earlier, using the debugger, we printed out the date as a string, so it was in this format: year minus month minus %D for day. So these are like format codes to represent dates and like years and months and days. So with that, we should be able to get an actual datetime object, which is like datetime wise, so to say. And then we use that variable down here, right? So when we instantiate the form, now we want to say here date obj, right? So then let's run the program again if it's not running already. So run. You can also rerun it, no problem. And reload here, fill in the data, let's say to 10 for the month 2024. Self-employed perhaps, submit. Okay, so I submitted the data. We see this view, so the application form was emptied. And now the data should have been stored in the data.db database. And if you want to prove that, if you're curious to see the actual data, then you want to use the DB browser for SQLite program. And yeah, open the database. Again, you need to locate that file. It's inside instance data.db. Go to browse, and yeah, here I see some data already. So that's the row I just added as a user. So you see the name, the surname, the email address, the date, and the occupation. So there we got the data. And that's the code. So with that, we have implemented the part that stores the data in our database. Now next is we want to display some message here that the data were submitted successfully, or something like that, like a notification for the user, so that the interface is user-friendly, because currently the user presses the submit button, but there's nothing here telling them that the submission actually worked. So let's do that in the next video. I'll see you there. Hey, welcome to a new video. You learn how to display a message just below the submit button so that we tell the user that the form was submitted successfully. That makes your interface, your web app, user-friendly. So users hate programs which don't give them feedback. So the user wants to know what's going on. Therefore, let's go to our index.html file and add something just below the button, right? So we said we want to add the message here below the submit button. So that submit button is located here, and we want to add some div tags. We can start this by just putting something static, like form was submitted successfully. By static, what I mean by static is that if you load the page now, So whenever you load the page, this is displayed here. But we want this to be dynamic text, meaning that this should be displayed once the user presses the submit button and not being there permanently. So let's do that. Let's see how we can do that. To do that, we need to go outside of the div opening tag, and we want to say if messages with this syntax, so curly brackets, percentage curly brackets. But more accurately, this is Jinja 2 syntax, so to say. So Jinja 2 is like a middleman that lets your Python code communicate with your HTML code. You'll see how your Python code will communicate in just a minute. But let's finish this syntax. So this is the div tag, the closing div tag, and after the closing div tag you want to close that if block with end if here. So now we are saying that if there are messages to be displayed, then we will display those messages. So what are messages? Where do these come from? Well, these should come from your code, your Python code. To implement that, you need to import the flash function from Flask, import flash, and then just here, so after you have finished with your operations, so you have submitted your data to the database, then you want to tell the user that your form was submitted successfully, right? And a success category. So this is the message and this is like the category of the message. Now this function will display this message in here, but we also need to add something else here. Just above the if message, again we need to perform some Jinja 2 coding like this. You say with messages equal to get flashed messages. So this is a Jinja 2 function. This will give us the messages we have defined in this function in our Python code. And those messages will be stored in this variable messages. And then we say if there are messages, so we check if there are messages, then we display this, right? And we also need to end this with block. So just below the end if line, we want to add an end with line. So this is my code, this is my Python code. Let's go here, reload this. So you see now that the text is not displayed anymore, right? So even though we have this form was submitted successfully, it's not being displayed here. But what happens if we add some data? Submit, we get this, form was submitted successfully. So this is being displayed there, right? So it's working, but to make this better, the best practice is to actually display this message to the index div here, because this will give you more options later on. Perhaps you want to get something from the data here, like the name of the user. You can say, you can use an f string and you can say first name, your form was submitted successfully, right? And then in here you remove that and you write a Jinja for loop with this symbols again for message in messages. So messages is a variable which has been defined in here, so we have access to that variable. Then you want to display the message. Note that here, to display a variable, the value of a variable, you want to use double curly brackets without percentage symbols, you see? And then you want to close that for loop with, you guessed it, and for. Right, let's indent this. It's not necessary, but it makes the code more readable. And yeah, let's reload. reload, fill in the data, submit, and there we go. So Ardit, your form was submitted successfully. That's the message. Now let's make this a bit more visually appealing by adding a class to the div element which contains the message. So this was displayed here, right? That's the message. And so we wrap this around with divs and we assign a class of alert success. Right, let's try again. Reload the page, submit the data again, submit. So now it looks better. And that's how you display a message just below your form to let the user know that the form was submitted successfully. So thanks for following this. Next, we want to send a confirmation email to the user. Let's do that in the next video. See you. Hey, welcome back. We have come a long way with this app. We were able to build the interface, get the data from the user, store them in the database, show a notification to the user. What's left to do now is to send a confirmation email to the user email address. So anything that the user enters here as an email address, we should send them an email using our own email address. By our own, I mean something you want to use for this application. So perhaps not your personal email, but I do recommend to create a Gmail account, which you can use for this. So here I have one. And the first thing you want to do in Gmail is you want to go to manage your Google account and you want to go to security and you need to turn on two-step verification if you haven't done that already. Once you do that, you should go to app passwords, again in security, and you want to create a new app password here. So select other, pick a name for this, Flask application form, click on generate, and you want to copy that. That is the password of this Google account, app8flask. So I'll be sending emails to my users using this Gmail account. Python will be sending those emails. So we need to give Python the password of that Gmail account in app.py. So you want to access app.config and then access mail passwords with capital letters. That is equal to the password I copied. And of course you also want to give the mail username. This will be your Gmail account. So app8flask@gmail.com in my case. So mail username, mail password. We also need to declare the mail server, which in my case, since I'm using Gmail, this is going to be smtp.gmail.com, and also the port app.config mail port, which for Gmail it is 465, so a number. Also, you want to add a configuration regarding the SSL, mail use SSL equal to true. And once you have done that, you need to import from Flask mail, import mail, comma, message, these two classes. Flask mail is something we need to install in the terminal, so pip install Flask -mail. Right, successfully installed. So then down here, so we have the DB here, and then we want to create a mail instance using the mail class we imported here, and we need to connect it to the app, and that's how the mail class will get these data, right? So the app contains these data through the config property, which is a dictionary, and so the mail will use those data to log in to the Gmail account and send that email. But we need to add something else, so that's the instance. Now we need to go to the index function. So in between the commit method and the flash function, we want to send out the email, and then we want to flash the message. So to send the email, we need to create a message instance. Message is the class we imported here, right? So message gets as the first argument the subject of the email, new form submission, for example, a comma, another argument will be, so that was the subject. The second argument will be the sender, which is going to be equal to app.config mail username. Then we have the recipient, which comes as a list because theoretically you might have to send an email to more than one email address, and in this case this would be email, right? So a list with one item. Email is this one in here, so we get the email from the user form. This is the user's email address, so the receiver. And lastly, the body of the message of the email, and this is going to be perhaps a variable which we'll define here, message body equal to an f string perhaps. Thank you for your submission, comma, and we can play around with placeholders here. So thank you for your submission, Ardit, whatever name we get here from the form. Perhaps a period, enter and continue the message here. So you have another F here, but it will be the same string stored in this message body. Here are your data, right? And then you want to say something like first name again, a break line, last name, break line again, and then it will be the date. So date, the string, we want to put the string here. And yes, I'll leave it with these. You can add more of these, occupation perhaps, but this is enough for now. I'll add another break line, and in the next line I'll say thank you. That's it. So we have the message in here, and then we apply mail.send message. So we send this message instance, right? Using the mail instance, which was defined up here. Right, so yeah, let's try this out. Let's reload first. Oh, it's not running, so let's run it. Reload. So I'm gonna get an email to this email address. So this is the receiver app8 Django, and my sender email address is app8 Flask. Employed, submit. Right, we got the notification. Let's check if we got a message. So that's app8 Django, and this is what we've got. Thank you for your submission, Ardit. Here are your data. We need one more \n here. We can do that. Ardit Sulce, and that's my date of when I want to start the job. Thank you. So between data and Ardit, we need one more \n, and that should fix it. So that's how you send out an email. And we used Flask Mail for that, so that makes email sending easier. I hope you enjoy this app, and let's move on with next app, which is gonna be the same app with Django, but with one very important addition, an admin interface, because currently what we've got here is we've got the user interface, right? So we get data from users and we store them in this database file, which can be accessed using programs such as DB browser for SQLite, so we can see the data that has been submitted by users. But that is not ideal. We also want an interface, a friendly interface, a web interface for the admins also, right? For the recruiter perhaps, or the employer who want to see this data and they don't want to go through a program such as DB browser. And that can be implemented using Django. It can also be done with Flask, but Django is more appropriate for complete apps with an admin interface. So let's move on to Django. So you have a 360-degree skill set when it comes to web development with Python. So Flask and Django are really necessary to know. So thanks a lot for this. I'll see you in the next days.